It was just another ordinary shift for Emily, a 27-year-old waitress at a small, dimly lit diner on the edge of town. The kind of place where the coffee was always a little too bitter, the chairs squeaked, and the regulars knew each other by name. She wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that night, her mind drifting to the mountain of bills waiting for her at home. Rent was due, her car was on its last leg, and the tips tonight had been, well, less than inspiring. But Emily had learned to push through the exhaustion. Life had taught her that if you kept showing up, even on the hardest days, something good might eventually come your way. She just didn't know how true that would turn out to be, or how soon. The bell above the diner door jingled, pulling her out of her thoughts. She looked up, expecting to see another tired face from the late-night crowd. Instead, her eyes met a man who carried himself with a quiet confidence that immediately set him apart. He was tall, dressed in a sleek black coat that looked like it cost more than her monthly paycheck, and his presence seemed to fill the room. But it wasn't just his appearance that caught her attention. There was something about the way he looked at her, like he saw her, really saw her, in a way most people didn't. He took a seat at the counter, and Emily grabbed a menu, forcing a smile as she approached him. "Welcome to Rosie's. What can I get for you tonight?" The man didn't even glance at the menu. "Just coffee, please. Black." His voice was calm, steady, and carried a warmth that put her at ease. As she poured his coffee, she couldn't help but notice the way he watched her. Not in a creepy way, but with a kind of curiosity, like he was piecing together a puzzle. She set the cup in front of him, and he thanked her with a nod. "Long night?" he asked, his eyes flicking to the dark circles under hers. Emily laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "You could say that. Just trying to make it to the weekend." What Emily didn't know was that this man wasn't just another customer. His name was Marcus Grant, and he was one of the wealthiest people in the country, a self-made billionaire who had built his empire from the ground up. But more than that, he was a man who believed in second chances, in seeing potential where others saw nothing. And as he sat there, sipping his coffee and watching Emily move around the diner with a quiet determination, he saw something in her that reminded him of himself. A spark, a resilience, a hunger for something more. The night wore on, and the diner grew quieter. Marcus stayed longer than most customers would, occasionally asking Emily questions about her life in a way that felt genuine, not intrusive. She found herself opening up to him in a way she hadn't with anyone in a long time. She told him about her dreams of going back to school, her love for art, and how she'd been saving every penny to try to make it happen. He listened intently, nodding along, but never revealing who he was or why he was so interested in her story. And then, just as the clock struck midnight, he stood up to leave, leaving a crisp $100 bill on the counter, far more than the cost of his coffee. Emily's eyes widened as she picked it up. "Sir, this is too much," she called after him, but he was already at the door. He turned back, a small smile playing on his lips. "Consider it an investment," he said cryptically, and with that, he was gone, leaving Emily standing there, clutching the bill and wondering what on earth had just happened. Little did she know, this was only the beginning, because Marcus Grant wasn't done with her, not by a long shot. And the next time their paths crossed, it would change her life, in ways she could never have imagined. But for now, all she could do was wait, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and uncertainty, as the door swung shut behind him, leaving her with more questions than answers. The next few days passed in a blur for Emily. She couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious man who had left her that $100 bill. It wasn't just the money, though that had been a lifesaver, helping her cover a late utility bill she'd been stressing over. It was the way he had looked at her, the way he had listened, like her dreams mattered, like she mattered. She replayed their conversation in her mind over and over, trying to make sense of it. Who was he? Why had he been so kind? And what did he mean by "consider it an investment"? The questions gnawed at her, but there were no answers. Just the memory of his calm, steady voice and the way he had disappeared into the night. Life, however, didn't stop for her curiosity. The diner was as busy as ever, and Emily's shifts blended together in a haze of coffee refills, scrambled eggs, and polite small talk with customers. But every time the bell above the door jingled, her heart would skip a beat, and she'd glance up, half expecting to see him walk in again. He never did. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted that night, like the universe had nudged her onto a path she couldn't quite see yet. Meanwhile, Marcus Grant was back in his world, a world of boardrooms, private jets, and high-stakes deals. But even as he moved through his daily routine, his mind kept drifting back to the diner and the young waitress who had served him coffee. There was something about her, her grit, her quiet determination, the way she carried herself despite the weight of her circumstances. It reminded him of his own journey decades ago, when he had been the one scraping by, working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. He had been lucky. Someone had seen his potential and given him a chance. Now, he wondered if maybe it was his turn to pay it forward. But Marcus wasn't a man who acted on impulse. Every decision he made was calculated, deliberate. He had built his empire by seeing opportunities where others saw obstacles, and he wasn't about to change that now. So, he did what he always did when faced with a decision. He gathered information. He called in a few favors, discreetly of course, and soon he had a file on Emily Carter. It wasn't anything invasive, just the basics. Her age, her background, her work history. He learned that she had grown up in a small town, raised by a single mother who had worked tirelessly to provide for her. He learned that she had dreams of becoming an artist, but had put them on hold to help support her family. He learned that she was the kind of person who showed up, day after day, no matter how hard things got. And the more he read, the more convinced he became that she was worth investing in. But Marcus wasn't the only one watching Emily. Unbeknownst to her, she had caught the attention of someone else, someone with far less noble intentions. A few days after Marcus's visit, a man named Victor Kane walked into the diner. He was a regular, though not the friendly kind. Victor was the type of customer who always seemed to be looking for something to complain about, no matter how good the service was. He had a sharp tongue and a mean streak, and the other waitresses had learned to avoid him whenever possible. But Emily, ever the professional, always served him with a smile, even when he made snide comments about the food or left a measly tip. That night, Victor was in a particularly foul mood. He slammed his menu down on the table and barked his order at Emily, barely looking at her. She took it in stride, jotting down his order and heading back to the kitchen. But as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were following her, watching her every move. It made her skin crawl, but she told herself she was just being paranoid. After all, Victor was always unpleasant. This was nothing new. What Emily didn't know was that Victor had been watching her for weeks. He had noticed how hard she worked, how she never complained, even when the other waitresses did. He had seen the way she interacted with customers, always kind, always patient. And he had also noticed the mysterious man who had come in that night, the one who had left her a $100 tip. Victor wasn't a billionaire, but he was a man who knew how to spot an opportunity. And in Emily, he saw something he could use as the night wore on. Victor lingered at his table, nursing his coffee and pretending to read a newspaper. When Emily finally brought him his check, he looked up at her with a smirk. "You're a hard worker," he said, his tone dripping with false sincerity. "You ever think about doing something bigger?" Emily blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. Victor leaned back in his seat, his eyes narrowing. As he studied her, "I mean, a girl like you could go far if she had the right connections. I might be able to help you out, for a price, of course." Emily's stomach churned. She didn't like the way he was looking at her, like she was a prize he could win. "I'm fine, thanks," she said quickly, forcing a smile as she took his payment and turned to leave. But Victor wasn't done. "Think about it," he called after her. "You don't want to be stuck in this dump forever, do you?" Emily didn't respond. She just kept walking, her heart pounding as she retreated to the safety of the kitchen. That night, as she walked home in the dark, Emily couldn't shake the unease that had settled over her. Between Victor's unsettling offer and the mystery of Marcus Grant, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something big, something life-changing. But whether it was an opportunity or a danger, she couldn't tell. All she knew was that her quiet, predictable life was about to be turned upside down. And as she unlocked the door to her tiny apartment and stepped inside, she couldn't help but wonder what was waiting for her on the other side of that uncertainty. The days that followed Victor's unsettling comments at the diner were anything but ordinary for Emily. She tried to push his words out of her mind, focusing instead on her work and the small joys she could find, like the regulars who always left her a kind word or the occasional sunny morning on her walk to work. But Victor's presence lingered like a shadow, and every time he came into the diner, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. He never said anything outright threatening, but his sly remarks and lingering stares made it clear that he wasn't going to let his offer go. Emily did her best to avoid him, but in a small diner, that was easier said than done. Meanwhile, Marcus Grant was quietly making plans. He had decided that Emily was worth investing in, but he wasn't the type to hand out opportunities without ensuring they would be used wisely. He wanted to test her character, to see if she had the drive and determination to seize the chance he was about to give her. So, he arranged for a series of small challenges to be placed in her path, opportunities disguised as obstacles. The first came in the form of a job posting she stumbled across one afternoon. It was for a position at a local art gallery, a place she had always dreamed of working but never thought she'd have a shot at. The pay wasn't great, but it was a foot in the door, a chance to be around the art she loved. Emily hesitated, torn between the stability of her waitressing job and the risk of pursuing something she was passionate about. But then she thought about Marcus's words, consider it an investment. Maybe this was her chance to invest in herself. She applied for the job, pouring her heart into the application and even including a few sketches she had done in her spare time. It felt like a long shot, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. What she didn't know was that Marcus had personally reached out to the gallery owner, a friend of his, and put in a good word for her. He didn't want to make it easy, he wanted her to earn it, but he also wanted to give her a fair shot. While Emily was busy navigating this new opportunity, Victor was plotting his own moves. He had been watching her closely, and when he noticed her sudden interest in the art gallery, he saw an opening. Victor wasn't a man of wealth or influence, but he was cunning, and he knew how to manipulate people to get what he wanted. He started showing up at the diner more often, always sitting in Emily's section and making small talk that felt anything but innocent. "Heard you're trying to get into the art world," he said one night, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Emily froze, caught off guard. "How did you know that?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Victor just smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made her skin crawl. "I hear things," he said, "and like I said before, I might be able to help you out. For a price." Emily didn't take the bait. She brushed him off with a polite but firm, "No, thank you," and walked away, but the encounter left her shaken. She couldn't figure out how Victor knew about the gallery job, and the thought that he was keeping tabs on her made her feel exposed, vulnerable. She started looking over her shoulder more often, both at work and on her way home, half expecting to see him lurking in the shadows. It was a feeling she hated, but she didn't know how to make it stop at the same time. Marcus was keeping a close eye on things from afar. He had people watching Emily, not to intrude on her privacy, but to ensure she was safe, and to gauge how she handled the challenges he was subtly placing in her path. When he heard about Victor's growing interest in her, his protective instincts kicked in. Marcus had seen men like Victor before, predators who preyed on people's dreams and vulnerabilities. He wasn't about to let someone like that derail Emily's future. But he also knew that stepping in too soon could undermine the lessons he wanted her to learn. So, he bided his time, waiting for the right moment to intervene. The tension in Emily's life was building, and she felt like she was being pulled in two different directions. On one side was the possibility of a new beginning, a chance to chase her dreams and maybe, just maybe, change her life for the better. On the other side was Victor, a man who seemed determined to drag her into something dark and dangerous. And then there was Marcus, the enigmatic stranger who had appeared out of nowhere and left her with more questions than answers. She didn't know who to trust or what to do, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't stay stuck in the middle forever. One night, after a particularly long shift, Emily was walking home when she heard footsteps behind her. She quickened her pace, her heart racing as the footsteps grew louder. She glanced over her shoulder and saw a figure in the shadows, too far away to recognize, but close enough to make her panic. She broke into a run, her breath coming in short, frantic gasps. As she fumbled for her keys, she made it to her apartment and slammed the door shut behind her, locking it and leaning against it as she tried to calm her racing heart. Was it Victor? Or was she just being paranoid? She didn't know, but the fear was real as she sat there. In the dark, clutching her keys and trying to steady her breathing, Emily realized something. She couldn't keep living like this. She had to make a choice, to take control of her life before it spiraled completely out of her hands. But what that choice would be, she didn't know yet. All she knew was that the storm brewing around her was about to break, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same.